Becoming yourself often requires unbecoming everything you were told to be. This is one of the most radical and recurring truths in Brené Brown's message, that real authenticity isn't about adding more to who you are. It's about peeling back the layers of identity, expectation, and performance that were never yours to carry. Disappearing in this context becomes a sacred unraveling. Not a breakdown, not a vanishing act, but an intentional pause, a withdrawal from what is false so that what is real can finally surface. So many of us have built lives carefully shaped around approval, acceptance, and survival. We've become what was rewarded. We've edited ourselves to fit the roles we were given. Dutiful daughter, reliable friend, high achiever, good partner, quiet one, strong one, peacemaker, provider. And somewhere along the way, the real self, the one with contradictions, complexity, and quiet desires, gets buried beneath layers of shoulds and shame. But she also names the discomfort of silence. It's not always peaceful. Often it reveals what we've been avoiding, our own grief, rage, confusion, desire. When there's no one to perform for, no script to follow, we're left with ourselves in raw, unfiltered form. And that's the very place where healing begins. Not in answers, but in acknowledgement. Not in action, but in stillness. Silence in this context becomes a kind of homecoming. A return to the parts of ourselves that don't shout, but know. The parts that have waited patiently beneath all the doing and proving and pushing. Brown reminds us that we don't need to narrate our way to authenticity. Sometimes we simply need to stop speaking long enough to hear who we've become. We are trained to fill silence, to respond quickly, to prove we're listening, to reassure others that we're still engaged. But in doing so, we often override the subtler truths trying to make themselves known within us. When we choose silence, we give those truths a chance to speak. Not to an audience, not for validation, just to us. Brown frames this as an act of inner fidelity, the decision to stop outsourcing our clarity and start listening to the small, honest voice that lives beneath the noise. And that voice, it rarely speaks in full sentences. It often doesn't provide instructions. Sometimes it doesn't even speak in words. It shows up as a tension in the chest, a lump in the throat, a resistance we can't explain, a longing that won't quiet down. Brown calls us to trust that these sensations are communication, that the wisdom we seek is already inside of us, just waiting for silence wide enough to stretch out in. Silence is not emptiness. It is the beginning of truth. In Brené Brown's exploration of disappearing, she draws a powerful connection between silence and clarity. Not the silence imposed by fear or avoidance, but the chosen silence. The kind we enter intentionally when we grow weary of noise, performance, and external direction. This silence, she says, is where the deeper layers of our truth begin to surface. Not all at once, not with certainty, but slowly, gently, like breath returning to a body that forgot how to rest. In a world that prizes explanation and constant communication, silence can feel threatening. People ask, "Are you okay?" when you grow quiet. They wonder what's wrong, what's broken, what needs fixing. But Brown invites us to see silence not as the absence of sound, but as the presence of space. Space to hear what we've been drowning out. Our intuition, our weariness, our quiet anger, our unspoken needs, our unlived lives. That's information, not failure. This isn't about withdrawal rooted in bitterness or resentment. It's about a fierce, quiet devotion to your own becoming. Visibility can be beautiful when it's voluntary, when it's earned through safety, intimacy, and reciprocity. But when it becomes obligation, when it begins to cost us peace, clarity, or authenticity, it's okay to step back. It's okay to disappear. Brown holds space for the fear that comes with this, the fear of being forgotten, misunderstood, labeled as cold, distant, or selfish. But she asks us to trust that who we are in silence is no less worthy than who we are in action. That our value is not measured by our productivity, our updates, or our appearances. Sometimes the most honest thing we can do is remove ourselves from view, turn inward, and tend to the quiet parts of us that never get the spotlight, for the comfort of others, for the illusion of being fine. She invites us instead to reclaim invisibility as a sacred act, a conscious choice to remove ourselves from performative spaces, to rest from the pressure of being watched, needed, liked, or understood. She teaches that we are allowed to close the door, to not respond, to not update anyone, to go quiet, not because we're shutting down, but because we're choosing presence with ourselves over performance for others. Disappearing doesn't mean vanishing from love or responsibility. It means drawing a clear boundary between your inner truth and the outside world's demands. It means choosing to be whole over being seen. And it requires a deep, often uncomfortable shift, releasing the belief that we owe people constant access to us in order to be worthy of connection. Brown gently reminds us that real relationships don't collapse under temporary silence. And the ones that do, you don't owe anyone your visibility. Brené Brown challenges the deeply conditioned belief that our value is tied to how present we are in other people's lives, how available we remain, how consistently we show up on command. In a world where presence has become currency, where we're expected to document our lives, share our thoughts, post our progress, and narrate our healing, Brown offers something revolutionary: permission to disappear without explanation and without guilt. So many of us live under the quiet pressure of being on for our families, on for our colleagues, on for social media, on for friends who lean on us more than they listen to us. There's an unspoken expectation to be emotionally accessible, endlessly understanding, and visibly okay, even when we're not, even when something inside us is quietly unraveling. Brown says this expectation is not just unsustainable, it's soul fracturing. It leads us to abandon ourselves for the sake of appearances. It's simply the natural pain of transition, the shedding of a skin we lived in for so long we forgot it wasn't permanent. What if letting go could be viewed as an act of self-respect, as a declaration that we deserve to live in alignment rather than obligation? Brown believes it can. She believes that we can hold gratitude for what something gave us while still releasing it with an open hand. We don't have to stay bound to something just because it once saved us. We don't have to keep proving our endurance when it's time to surrender. And perhaps most powerfully, she reminds us that letting go is often how we reclaim our energy. So many of us are exhausted, not from doing too much, but from holding too tightly, from trying to hold together identities, systems, and expectations that no longer reflect who we are. When we release what no longer fits, Brown asks us to be honest about what we're carrying, simply because we always have, not because we still need to. She reminds us that letting go is not an act of erasure. It's an act of making space. It's choosing truth over attachment. It's learning to trust that releasing control, identity, or obligation doesn't mean collapse. It often leads to expansion. When we stop gripping so tightly, we're free to feel, to heal, to discover, and more importantly, we're free to breathe. To live a life rooted in authenticity, not in old expectations. Brown speaks to the grief that comes with this process, because letting go, even when it's right, is not easy. It comes with nostalgia, doubt, and fear. We second guess ourselves. We wonder if we've made a mistake. We feel the ache of what once was. But she teaches us to sit with that ache without interpreting it as regret. Letting go is not loss, it's liberation. Brené Brown invites us to radically reframe our relationship with letting go. So often, we view release as defeat, as if loosening our grip on something we once held dear is an admission of failure, weakness, or irresponsibility. But Brown challenges this deeply ingrained mindset. She says that what we're really doing when we let go isn't giving up, it's making room for peace, for truth, for who we're becoming. Letting go doesn't always mean walking away from something toxic or traumatic. Sometimes it means releasing something that once fit us perfectly, but no longer does. A dream we've outgrown, a relationship that quietly stopped nourishing us, a role we've mastered but no longer feel alive inside. And the hardest ones to release are often those that almost still work, because they give just enough comfort to keep us tethered, even while they slowly drain our energy. These rituals are not decorative. They are anchors that keep the shape of our inner landscape from collapsing under outer pressure. They ground us in the reality that post-disappearance life is not about catching up to the world's speed, but about setting a rhythm that matches our truest pulse. And integration demands patience with ourselves and others. Brown is clear. Those around us may still relate to the version we left behind. They might be surprised by our slower answers, new limits, softer edges, or sharpened convictions. We will be tempted to dim the change for their comfort. But the work of integration is to stay steady, kind but unwavering, in the new alignment. It is not our job to edit the truth we earned in silence so it fits old molds. Our responsibility is to live it, gently and repeatedly, until it becomes ordinary fact. She invites us to see integration as a daily practice of devotion to what we now know. It begins with the smallest renegotiations, a deliberate pause before saying yes, a gentler morning pace, a phone left in another room, a boundary spoken without apology. These micro acts are the stitches that sew new skin over old habits. They are humble, often invisible to anyone else, yet they are where transformation becomes sustainable. In each repetition, we prove to ourselves that the wisdom we gained is not fragile. It can survive fluorescent lights, busy calendars, and unexpected criticism. Integration also asks for new rituals that honor the lessons learned. Maybe it is a silent walk at dusk, a weekly evening of uncompromised rest, a journal kept open on the bedside table, or a 5-minute breath before opening email. Integration demands intention. Brené Brown insists that disappearing is only half the alchemy. The other half is weaving what we discovered back into the fabric of ordinary days. After the hush, after the stillness, after the honest reckoning, there comes a quieter but equally courageous task, letting the insights earned in solitude reshape how we move through grocery aisles, meetings, friendships, and Friday evening. The risk is that we treat our disappearance like an isolated retreat. One remarkable weekend of clarity, then a swift slide back into familiar autopilot. Brown warns that this fracture between revelation and routine can erode everything we fought for in the dark. This is about reclaiming sovereignty over your life. It's about saying, I don't need to be in crisis to deserve rest. I don't need to be broken to step away. I trust myself enough to leave before I collapse. It's a shift from reacting to breakdowns, to honoring our boundaries and energy preemptively. It's a return to the kind of self-relationship where we no longer betray ourselves for the comfort of others. So when the inner voice says, it's time, may we listen. May we pause. May we let the discomfort come. And may we trust that even in the stillness, especially in the stillness, we are not lost. Not by the noise of the world, but by something quieter, older, wiser. Our truest self. That sometimes the deepest breakthroughs happen without anyone else watching. And that answering the internal call doesn't always mean grand gestures. Sometimes it means saying no more often, canceling things, turning inward, choosing solitude, letting silence stretch. Trusting this call means accepting that others might not understand your choices. They may ask what's wrong. They may feel abandoned. They may project their fears onto your stillness. But Brown gently encourages us to remember, no one else has to understand the call that was made for you. The only one who must trust it is you. That's when it begins, that quiet, aching urge to disappear. Not to escape, but to recalibrate. Not to hide, but to return to yourself. Brown emphasizes that this calling is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It's a sign that something within you has outgrown its current container. The way you've been living, the things you've been tolerating, the persona you've been maintaining, it's no longer sustainable. Your soul knows it. Your body knows it. Even if your mind still argues against it. And the more you resist it, the louder the discomfort becomes. There's tremendous courage in trusting that inner call, especially when it leads you into the unknown. Trust the internal calling, that quiet, persistent pull that whispers it's time. Time to pause, time to step away, time to shed. Brené Brown urges us to stop ignoring that inner voice, not because it's loud or dramatic, but because it's true. In a world that demands evidence, external approval, and explanations for every decision we make, listening to our intuition can feel like rebellion. But Brown reminds us, the deepest wisdom often doesn't come with clarity. It comes with a knowing, a felt sense, a tug. It rarely arrives with certainty or a perfect plan. The internal calling doesn't explain itself. It doesn't give us a schedule or a guarantee. It doesn't wait until we've cleaned up our emotions or secured a soft landing. It simply speaks, often in inconvenient moments, often when everything on the outside appears fine, but something on the inside feels misaligned, heavy, hollow. And if you don't return, if you quietly release a chapter of your life, a career, a relationship, a persona you outgrew, that too is brave. That too is beautiful. We are allowed to evolve past the need to explain our leaving. Sometimes the very act of not returning is the boldest expression of growth. an act of self-respect that says, I no longer need to make myself small just to belong. This point speaks to the heart of what it means to truly disappear, not just to rest, but to rewrite, to allow ourselves to be remade by what we've walked through and to stop forcing ourselves into the expectations of who we were before the silence, before the burnout, before the clarity that came in the quiet. Brown reminds us that real strength is not in bouncing back. It's in the stillness that lets us ask, do I want to go back at all? Or is it time to begin something entirely new? Sometimes the journey inward changes us so completely that going back to what once was is no longer possible. The environment we left behind may not recognize who we've become. The roles we once played might feel suffocating. The pace we once tolerated may now feel violent. And that's okay. That's not failure or detachment. It's clarity. It's the sacred result of doing the hard work in the dark, where no one claps and no one sees, where the only witness to our becoming is ourselves. Brown names something few are brave enough to articulate, that the version of you who returns, if you return, is not here to resume. That version is here to redefine. Perhaps you no longer say yes to things that once drained you. Perhaps your silence has taught you what is non-negotiable. Perhaps you've realized that disappearing wasn't a retreat at all. It was the moment you found your boundaries, your voice, and your worth. Not as an identity to prove, but as a truth to live, to return stronger, if you return at all. This statement lingers like a quiet challenge, reshaping the way we think about stepping away. For Brené Brown, disappearing isn't a temporary escape with a clear path back to the way things were. It's a threshold, a reckoning, a pause that may lead to renewal, but not always a return to the same life, same people, or same self. And that's not something to fear. That's something to honor. In a culture obsessed with comebacks and productivity, we've romanticized the idea of disappearing, only so we can come back better, shinier, more acceptable to the world. But Brown pushes us deeper. She suggests that the point of stepping away is not to perform a triumphant return. It's to heal honestly, to transform privately, and to choose alignment over approval when we do emerge. If we emerge, it's the evidence that we're no longer sleepwalking through our lives. It means we're awake, aware, and paying attention. So when you disappear, when you take that inward journey that feels lonely and uncertain, and suddenly you hit the edge where nothing feels certain or safe, that's not failure. That's the threshold. That's the sacred crossing point. And the discomfort you feel there, it's not your enemy, it's your guide. It's showing you where you are, and more importantly, that you're no longer stuck in place. You're in motion. You're becoming. Brown encourages us not to resist the discomfort, but to sit with it, to honor it, even when it feels unbearable, because in that tight, messy space of emotional friction is where our inner wiring begins to reconfigure. It's where we learn to hold ourselves instead of seeking someone else to fix us. It's where we grow, not in spite of the pain, but through it. There's something almost sacred about choosing to stay present in discomfort instead of rushing back to comfort zones that no longer fit us. In our culture, discomfort is often pathologized. We're taught to soothe it quickly, to self-improve our way out of it, or to drown it in distraction. But Brené Brown flips that narrative. She tells us that discomfort is not a glitch in the system. It is the system of transformation, not because we're doing something wrong, but because we're finally doing something true. Disappearing, in the way Brown describes, is not a polished, peaceful retreat. It's not a spa day for the soul. It's more often a tender, raw, and disorienting process. It is the shedding of identities, obligations, and performances we've carried for years. And just like skin being peeled back after sunburn, it stings. There's no shortcut through this part, no instant insight or tidy resolution. Discomfort isn't a problem to solve, it's a message to listen to, a sign that you're stretching beyond the familiar, that you're inching toward the edge of who you've been and touching the edge of who you're becoming. Discomfort is part of the journey, not a detour, not a sign that something has gone wrong, but an essential companion in the process of becoming. Brené Brown gently but firmly calls this out as a truth we often avoid, that meaningful change, true emotional healing, and inner transformation almost always arrive hand in hand with discomfort. And not just fleeting or surface level unease, but the kind of deep, aching uncertainty that makes us want to run, numb, or distract ourselves. Yet Brown doesn't offer a way around discomfort, she offers a way through it. She speaks to the internal restlessness we feel when we begin to question old patterns, when we realize the life we've been living no longer fits, when we start saying no to things we once said yes to, not because we've changed on the outside, but because something deep within us has shifted. And in that space between the old and the new, the known and the unknown, there's discomfort. This kind of healing cannot be rushed. It has no timeline, no checklist, no applause at the end. It requires surrender. It asks us to be patient with ourselves, to resist the urge to emerge too soon just to prove that we're okay. Brown reminds us that the pressure to be visibly healing often pulls us out of the very space where true transformation begins. In silence, we're not performing our recovery for others, we're actually experiencing it. So we disappear, not to escape life, but to return to it more fully. We step back, not because we're defeated, but because we're choosing to rebuild from the inside out, away from the spotlight, away from the noise. Healing happens in that gentle, invisible unfolding. And the beauty of it is, no one needs to see it for it to be real. The quiet isn't empty. It's not void of meaning or purpose. It's filled with tiny recalibrations. Our nervous system slowly unwinding, our emotions realigning, our stories being re-examined without the pressure of being told to anyone else. It's in that quiet space that our bodies begin to tell the truth, uninterrupted. Our hearts start to beat to their own rhythm again, no longer sinking to the expectations of the people or systems around us. Brené emphasizes that this quiet doesn't always feel comforting at first. It can feel disorienting, even painful, because in the absence of noise, all the parts of us we've been avoiding tend to rise to the surface. The grief, the doubt, the exhaustion, the parts we've pushed down in order to keep going, to be productive, to be strong. But instead of rushing to fix those parts, Brown invites us to sit with them, to let them speak, to honor them as indicators that healing is underway, not in spite of the silence, but because of it. Healing happens in the quiet. That's the invitation Brené Brown places gently in front of us. An invitation to recognize that not all transformation is loud, not all growth is visible, and not all strength looks like motion. In fact, some of the most profound healing occurs in silence, in solitude, in stillness, that is so subtle it could easily be mistaken for nothing happening at all. But something is happening, something sacred, something essential. We often associate healing with action, going to therapy, talking it out, sharing our pain, seeking answers, fixing ourselves. And yes, those are necessary parts of the journey. But what Brown speaks to is that deeper, often ignored layer. What happens when we stop explaining, stop defending, stop performing? There's a level of restoration that can only occur when we stop trying to be seen or understood, when we turn down the volume on external validation and tune in to the almost imperceptible movements of our inner world. Most self-aware moves we can make. This isn't weakness, it's a declaration. I matter enough to pause. I matter enough to be quiet. I matter enough to go invisible, just for a while, so I can reemerge more whole. In this lens, disappearing becomes an act of radical trust. Trust in the process, trust in the return, and most of all, trust in ourselves. Disappearing, she says, is not about quitting. It's about retreating inward to process the quiet shifts happening beneath the surface. Often, the most essential inner changes don't occur in front of an audience. They happen in the hush, in solitude, in the stillness of not needing to explain yourself to anyone, not even yourself. That kind of withdrawal takes more courage than people realize, because it requires us to admit that we're in transition, that something inside us is stirring, shifting, recalibrating. Brown encourages us to stop seeing our disappearance as a breakdown and start recognizing it as a rite of passage. It's not a loss of identity, but a sacred act of self-preservation. To intentionally remove ourselves from systems, conversations, or environments that no longer serve our growth is one of the boldest. Disappearing is not weakness, it's transformative courage. This single idea challenges one of the most ingrained beliefs in modern culture, that to be present, productive, and visible at all times is the only way to be strong. Brené Brown invites us to imagine the opposite. What if strength isn't in the showing up, but in the stepping back? What if bravery means vanishing for a while, not because we're broken, but because we're evolving? In a world that praises constant output, the idea of going offline, withdrawing from public space, or emotionally unplugging feels almost rebellious. We've been taught that disappearing is abandonment, failure, or collapse. But Brown reframes it entirely. She explains that it's not giving up on others or the world. It's about momentarily giving up the performance, the roles, the expectations. It's about slipping away from who we're supposed to be, so we can remember who we actually are.